By the end of World War II, in the summer of 1945, most of Japan's major cities had been reduced to ashes. Fortunately, the beautiful rivers and mountains surrounding the country's rural communities remained unscarred by the war. Fish continued to thrive in clear rivers, and insects abounded along the riverside. Back then, some 70% of all Japanese resided in poor but peaceful and beautiful rural villages. Theirs was a simple life. 3 generations lived under the same roof, allowing family members to help each other out at all times. Completely destroyed by the war, Japan's major cities gradually rose from the ruins. But they only restored production facilities back to the level they were in before and during the war. Japan's industry truly began full-scale production around 1950, 5 years after the close of the war. Keeping in line with Japan's national policy, the heavy chemical industry and other industries aimed to expand by stimulating new large-scale production facilities. By incorporating the machinery and technologies of the United States and other advanced industrial nations, Japan succeeded in upgrading production quality and increasing output. Its aim at that time was to catch up quickly with the other advanced industrial nations of Europe and the United States. To this end, new factories and facilities were made, and many Japanese devoted virtually all of their time to work. Japan also built new roads and railways one after the other, and increased the number and scale of its airports and ports. More and more Japanese began moving to cities as production activities there grew brisker. The populations of Tokyo, Yokohama, Nagoya, Osaka, Kita-Kyushu, and other major production centers rose from 63.5% in 1960 to 72.2% in 1970. This rise led to a rapid increase in housing-related construction. Farming villages continued to expand and mechanize their agricultural industries, and they were able to increase output with the use of agricultural chemicals and large amounts of chemical fertilizers. The modernization of Japan's agricultural industry enabled the country by 1960 to be 100% self-sufficient in the production of its major staple food, rice. By the 1960s, Japan had rid itself completely of all traces of the harsh starvation its people had to endure directly after the war. The country continued to increase the amount and variety of imported foodstuffs. Now the Japanese could eat as much as they wanted of their favorite foods whenever they pleased. By 1969, Japan boasted the world's second highest GNP, trailing only behind the United States. Meanwhile, Japanese living standards had improved tremendously, and the age of large-scale consumption had arrived. In other words, people had come to view the good life as one overflowing with an abundance of goods. Japan's rapid economic growth also raised havoc on the country's natural environment, polluting its air, rivers, and ocean. This pollution came to endanger the very lives of human beings. The organic mercury discharged by factories into the rivers of Kumamoto, Kagoshima and Niigata prefectures resulted in the occurrence of the Minamata disease, which, according to official figures, struck a total of 1,841 people, 667 of whom died in Kumamoto prefecture, 121 in Kagoshima prefecture, and 196 in Niigata prefecture. Approximately 123 people of Toyama prefecture died from the painful disease known as itai-itai, a form of cadmium poisoning. Moreover, the total number of people suffering from this disease is suspected of being about 1,000. Smoke emitted from smokestacks at a petroleum industrial complex in Yokkaichi City, Mie Prefecture, led to the rise of Yokkaichi asthma. As a result, many people found it harder and harder to breathe. The nitrogen oxide, sulfur oxide, carbon monoxide, dust, and so on emitted from this factory district used to seep into nearby cities. The air over Tokyo came to be plagued by photochemical smog. It was often so bad that classes had to be cancelled and children sent home. Sometimes, on extremely smoggy days, school was closed altogether. Water also became polluted by various chemical substances. In Japan, it was generally believed that the water could somehow wash away all the pollution, but the country's rivers gradually lost their ability to perform this cleansing function. Fuji City in Shizuoka Prefecture became a victim of pulp pollution because of the waste discharged into the Fuji River by large paper mills. This waste flowed into Tagonoura and caused a huge buildup of sludge. The use of agricultural chemicals caused serious pollution. The type of defoliant used during the Vietnam War was also used as herbicide on rice fields in Japan. Various kinds of agricultural chemicals were used to stamp out crop damage caused by blight and noxious insects. This resulted in the killing of many kinds of small animals and insects, such as dragonflies, spiders, locusts, grasshoppers and frogs. Contaminated farm produce was subsequently sold after being processed with various additives, including colouring and bleaching agents, seasonings, antioxidation agents and so on. The average Japanese person's breakfast included foods with over 10 kinds of additives, some of which were carcinogenic. Japan's rapid economic growth between 1950 and 1970 had its dark side, namely gross and rampant pollution. All of Japan was affected, and it came to be regarded as the island country of pollution. Japan's top priority after the war was to develop and expand its economy as quickly as possible, without considering environmental or health issues. This move, and the country's large production output and large-scale consumption, led to most of the pollution at that time. Although economic growth translated into great profits for countless companies, many people had to suffer as a result of the pollution it caused. Many Japanese began venting their anger towards companies and the government for the dangerously polluted environment they were forced to live in, as a result of their own hard work to create an age of plenty. People began participating in movements against pollution, and victims of pollution started to sue companies responsible for their injuries. Meanwhile, indictments were continuously being made by employees against their companies. These various moves reflected the people's rage towards all those responsible for pollution. The government and parliament finally responded to the situation and began holding discussions on the topic of pollution. They ended up hammering out several issues for the regulation and prevention of pollution. 1967 saw the creation of the first bill. It was called the Basic Regulation Against Pollution. Although a bill for the prevention of air pollution had been enacted back in 1962, it had to be revised in 1970 because of the many dangerous substances such as carbon monoxide, sulfur oxide, nitrogen oxide, sulfur acid mist, cadmium, chlorine, hydrofluoride and lead, which had since become major problems. In December 1970, a total of 14 anti-pollution bills were enacted with one sweep. They included measures against noise, vibrations, offensive stenches and farmland pollution. In addition, measures against the pollution of regular water and of lakes, marshes and the ocean. The various types of substances harmful to animals and human beings were clearly defined, and specific guidelines were set on the permissible amount of discharge of each of these substances. It was also decided that those not abiding by these guidelines would be strictly penalized. People started becoming more aware of those companies that disregarded the anti-pollution measures to pursue profit only. And people realized that such companies would eventually lose their social value, and they came to scrutinize the moral responsibility of these companies. Since 1970, investments in anti-pollution facilities have increased by 50% each year. These investments have helped spawn a trend towards cleaner air. With the exception of nitrogen dioxide, there has been an annual decrease in the emission amounts of harmful substances such as sulfur dioxide and carbon monoxide, not to mention fewer floating particles. Japan has aimed to attain cleaner water not only through the establishment of certain laws, but also with the help and cooperation of companies. Factories first remove harmful substances from their waste and then filter it through special facilities, before finally discharging it into rivers, lakes, marshes and so on. Thanks to strict observation of the water quality of Japan's rivers, lakes, marshes and ocean areas, there has been a gradual improvement in the country's water quality. Japan has yet to rid itself completely of all forms of pollution, mainly because of the yearly increase in the number of automobiles. As of 1990, Japan was home to some 60 million cars. That figure breaks down to about 1 car for every 2 Japanese. This increase in cars means that the total amount of nitrogen oxide and sulfur oxide emitted is also on the rise. Every Japanese car owner is obliged by law to have his car inspected at certain intervals of time. Japan supposedly has the world's strictest regulations with respect to gasoline emissions. Nevertheless, the huge amounts of nitrogen oxide emitted from large diesel vehicles continue to pollute the air as severely as before. Neither rivers, lakes, marshes, nor closed water areas of bays are as clean as they used to be. Meanwhile, incidents continue to occur where small to medium-sized factories are caught for illegally discharging unprocessed waste, which still contains harmful chemical substances. And pollution caused by the discharge of water used for various purposes in daily life still remains. At present, the dissemination rate of sewer systems in Japan is only 40%. For this reason, the country's rivers, lakes and marshes are still being polluted. Even on farms, some farmers have already advocated the use of fewer agricultural chemicals, but all kinds of chemicals are still being used in great abundance. In fact, dozens of chemicals are used on fruit, from their initial planting to when they are harvested. Although not as many food additives are being used these days, food processors are still incorporating a vast array of them into foods. To be sure, there are no longer any incidents of Japanese dying from outright pollution. One food hygienist, however, has written a controversial book in which he condemns the Japanese people's current eating habits. He claims that half of those born after 1959 will die before their 41st birthday, and the remaining half will die 2 to 3 years later because of their shift in preference for meat over their traditional diet centering around grains and vegetables. This book is currently a bestseller in Japan. Up until recently, heavy chemicals had been the most prominent industry in Japan. However, the country began in the late 1970s to shift more towards industries involved with high technology, information, and the gathering of new data. At the same time, the Japanese are opting for lives of greater comfort. This has given rise to new kinds of pollution and environmental destruction. The freon used in various spray products, catalysts for cooling agents, and cleaning agents for high-tech parts are partly responsible for the destruction of the Earth's ozone layer. Resorts are now being built all over Japan, a phenomenon which has wreaked destruction on the natural environment. The various chemicals used to maintain and control golf course lawns are polluting both water and soil. Indeed, this type of pollution has become quite a social issue. As of 1988, there were 1,487 golf courses in Japan, and they took up a total space of almost 1.5 billion square meters. All kinds of harmful chemicals are being used to keep the golf courses green. As a substitute form of energy for petroleum, nuclear power accounted for about 27% of all electric power generated in Japan as of 1988. However, there is still widespread concern about the safety of utilizing nuclear power, and it has become increasingly difficult to construct new nuclear power plants. As of 1988, these plants have produced 200 litres, or 8,000 drum cans of low-level radioactive waste matter. In fact, by 1988, such waste had been put into a total of roughly 462,000 drum cans. Japan is not the only nation responsible for eliminating pollution and protecting the natural environment. Countries all over the world must join forces and combat problems concerning global warming caused by increasing discharges of carbon dioxide. Nor can they overlook the issue of acid rain brought about by the emission of sulfur oxide and nitrogen oxide. Other international issues include the destruction of our ozone layer by freon gas and other substances, and the pollution of our oceans by such things as oil, chemical substances, and heavy metals. In spite of this, developing countries must still strive to educate more of their people, establish more sanitary environments, reduce their populations, increase their food supplies, and pursue various other developments to free themselves from the chains of poverty. Japan continues to help developing countries in such efforts, but its help has occasionally led to further destruction of the environment. Moreover, Japan's heavy imports of lumber have caused environmental destruction elsewhere. The media has criticized Japan sharply for its destructive lumbering practices. The Japanese themselves should most clearly recognize how extreme development and industrialization can lead to irreversible destruction and misery. Nevertheless, agricultural chemicals and other kinds of chemicals whose sales are forbidden in Japan are now being exported abroad. The Japanese must face up to their responsibility and readdress their conscience on this issue. We, as passengers aboard this great planet Earth spaceship, must tackle the problems caused by developments and industrialization before they kill off our planet completely. As an advanced industrialized country, Japan should advise developing countries on the kind of developments to pursue without ruining the environment. Developments that enable the harmonious coexistence of all living creatures. And while providing continual assistance, Japan should tell these countries about its own past experiences with pollution and teach them about effective measures for getting rid of it. As proclaimed in 1972 by the United Nations Human Environment Council, neglecting environmental issues could wipe out the prosperity of peoples all over the world and endanger the very survival of mankind. Japan's own trying experiences with massive pollution in the past has prompted it to contribute heavily to the United Nations Environmental Programme, which was formulated with the aim of saving the world from environmental destruction. In addition to offering financial assistance, Japan utilizes all kinds of opportunities to inform other countries about its own technologies and know-how to help guarantee harmonious developments and environmental protection in the future. In this way, Japan tries to do its part in keeping this planet a beautiful one. To assure that our grandchildren grow up in an environment abounding with dragonflies, butterflies, birds and fish, it is high time that each of us becomes fully aware of environmental issues.